Major funding for these broadcasts is made possible by grants from Capital One Bank and Chase Commercial Term Lending, the Witkoff Group, New York Community Bank, M&T Bank, Greenberg Traurig, Perfect Building Maintenance, Genova Burns. Additional funding is provided by grants from AKA Hotels, Corman Communities, Aerial Property Advisors, AVR Realty Company, Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, Bank Leumi USA, Briarwood Organization, CBRE, Citizens Bank, Colliers International NYC, CPEX Real Estate Services, Cushman & Wakefield, Customers Bank, DDG, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Fisher Brothers, First Nationwide Title Agency, Flushing Bank, Foley & Lardner, Friedman, Handler Real Estate Organization, HAP Investment Developers, Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, James Orphanides, Chairman USRealty.com, Kilroy Architectural Windows, New York's Window Company, Madison Realty Capital, Massey Knackle Realty Services, Matone Group, Mercantile Commerce Bank, N.A., Meridian Capital Group, Newmark Grubb Knight Frank, Newbanks, MHP Real Estate Services, Optimum Window Manufacturing Corp., People's United Bank, Rosewood Realty Group, SJP Properties, Sterling National Bank, Sterling Risk, Stonehenge Partners, TD Bank, Terra CRG, the Continuum Company, the CUNY TV Foundation, the Moynihan Group, and these friends.
Comedian, busboy, waiter, T-shirts at Shea Stadium? I want to be a lawyer? No, I don't want to be a lawyer. I want to be the best criminal defense attorney in New York and in the country, perhaps. I have the legendary Ben Brafman today. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
So tell me a little bit about your parents, because your father has a very interesting story, especially during Kristallnacht. Tell me about Dad and Mom.
My father grew up in Vienna, and at 18, the Nazis had come to power, were about to come to power, taking over most of Europe, and they marched into Vienna, and on Kristallnacht, my father watched as all of the synagogues in his neighborhood in Vienna was set on fire, and my father was a strong young man, good soccer player, and he and his friends started running up and down the streets, seeing what they could do to help, and he rescued a Torah from a synagogue that was on fire and hid the Torah and ultimately kept the Torah for years and brought it to the United States.
The interesting thing was how he was able to keep the Torah and bring it with him.
For periods of time when they had to cross a border, the Torah would be wrapped in shrouds, and they would tell the border police that it was a child who had died, and they wanted to take the body to their new country, and they managed to bring it all the way to the United States. I subsequently, many years later, had it restored, and it's in a school that my brother is the rabbi of in Far Rockaway, and it's used 2 times a year. It's used in Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year, and it's used on a fast day, Tisha B'Av, which is the saddest day of the year. And the students who listen to the Torah reading are told the story of the Torah, and it's quite a moment.
This was 1938.
1938.
And where'd your father, because he subsequently was in the military.
My father came to the United States, and shortly after he married my mother, he enlisted in the United States Army, had just been attacked by the Japanese, and he wanted to be a citizen. You join the Army. And I think my father had a real soldier personality. I think he was very grateful to the United States for welcoming him and his parents after what they had been through, and he wanted to defend his country, and he was an infantry sergeant for 3 years in the Philippines in some of the worst combat recorded during Second World War.
Tell me about Mom.
My mother's family, they were born in Czechoslovakia. My mother was sent to the United States in the hope that she would be able to bring the family over. She was 16. She comes over in the late 30s, early 40s, and she comes here alone on a boat, doesn't speak English, lands in the United States. Several weeks after she gets here, her parents are taken to Auschwitz and murdered. Her oldest sister, who had just been married and had a baby, she, her husband, and their baby were murdered. Parts of her family survived, and her brother survived and made it to Israel and spent 50 years in the Israeli army.
Now, you said to me your mother and father were married before your father joined the
That's right.
the army. How'd they meet?
They met at a Friday night dinner that was run by an organization that helped young immigrants meet other young immigrants, and they met. They got married, and my brother was about to be born, and my father got a 6-month deferment from his enlistment date so he could be here for the baby to be born. And then as soon as my brother was born, he went to war. Yeah.
So your father comes back after the war. They're residing at this time in Brooklyn, correct?
Williamsburg.
In Williamsburg. And you're born then?
I'm born several years later.
Right.
I'm born in 48.
48, okay. And your father, you told me, was in the garment center. He worked for a cousin or something?
My father worked for his brother. While my father was away at war, his brother had started a business with a partner. It became successful, but my father was not part of the success story. My father was a working person in the business. He had a job for 40 years, but he was a pattern maker. He cut material to fit the design patterns and was a salaried employee his whole life.
Now, you said to me when we got together, at that time your parents, you and your parents were living in the Williamsburg section of Brooklyn. You went to Yeshiva Torah of Adass.
Right.
And subsequently they moved to the Bell Harbor section.
Well, first we moved to Crown Heights.
Crown Heights.
Lived there for about 10 years, and then to Bell Harbor. So
tell me about growing up at Torah of Adass.
I was a troublemaker. You know, it was a very, very strict, very religious school, and I was a little bit rebellious. Your brother was
the good student, right?
I heard throughout my life when I was growing up, why can't you be like Aaron, your brother? He is brilliant and he studies and he doesn't fool around. And I was smart but not brilliant. I didn't study and I liked to fool around, so it was a bad combination for that type of school.
Talk about some of the jobs when you were growing up.
I worked since I was 10 years old. I helped waiters set up tables in hotels and Rockaways. I graduated.
People wouldn't remember there were hotels in Rockaways, right?
There were hotels in Rockaways. There were hotels in Arvin. There were hotels in Bell Harbor. They were on the boardwalk. There were hotels in Long Beach. And there were hotels in the Catskills. And a hotel, when I was growing up, was a place where you could make more money in a weekend than my father could make in a week. And more money during a holiday, like Passover, than my father would make in a month. And I was very aggressive. I was very good at certain things. I had good people skills. People liked me, and I like people. And when you're a waiter, and if people like you, they tip a lot.
How do you become a comedian?
I was a comedian for a very short period of time. We were working as a waiter, friends and I, and we were in the kitchen. Actually, I remember sorting silverware for the next meal. And the owner of the hotel comes running in with the panic-stricken face saying that the people who were supposed to perform at the show were in an automobile accident. They're not going to get here. He's got 500 antsy people in the social hall. They used to call it the casino at that time, but it was no gambling.
Now, this was up in the Catskills?
Up in the Catskills. And he said, can anyone sing a dance or tell jokes or talk? Just come out on the stage. And, you know, this guy I was working with played the piano and really played well and could sing, and I always could, you know, talk.
Now, how the selling T-shirts at the Monkees concert, how'd that happen?
Somebody I knew was investing in a business that was going to sell Monkees T-shirts. The Monkees were the second most popular group to the Beatles at that time. They were coming to do a concert at Shea Stadium. They were looking for kids to hawk T-shirts to the neighboring stores in Queens. So I got a couple of thousand T-shirts and schlepped them around all summer and got a couple of stores to buy them. I think I ended up making $100 after working all summer trying to get rid of this crap.
Now, so you graduate Torah Vodas, and how do you decide that you were going to go to Brooklyn College? And at Brooklyn College at night?
It really wasn't a big decision because there was no money to go to a private college. Torah Vodas wasn't a place where I had really excelled. And
you weren't planning to follow your brother into the...
I didn't want to be a rabbi, and I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I needed to work, or I wanted to work in Brooklyn College.
So at that time, you had no idea that you wanted to be an attorney?
No, I didn't know what I wanted to be, but I knew I wanted to go to college at night because I wanted to work during the day. And in retrospect, it was very good for me because I developed business skills and people skills and salesmanship that most of my classmates in school didn't have. And
now, while you were in college, you worked for Steve Solar's. How'd that happen? And you were on the third floor above the Chinese restaurant?
Well, I was at Brooklyn College. Steve Solar's, who he and I later became great friends, was teaching a political science course. I took it. It was 1968, I think, and Steve wanted to run for the New York State Assembly in Brighton Beach, the 45th Assembly District. We got to be talking one day, and he bemoaned the fact that he didn't speak Yiddish. And I said, I do. I could, really help you because I speak Yiddish, I write well, I speak well. And Brighton at the time was populated by a very, very large Yiddish-speaking elderly population. So I became everybody's grandson. And we walked the boardwalk and tried to get people interested in his campaign. And it worked, and it was a great team. He got elected by an extraordinary large margin. He became very successful. And afterwards, he asked if I would run his community district office. And running a community district office, third floor up, a walk up on top of a Chinese restaurant on 1818 Avenue U, was a wealth of crazy, wild, funny, interesting, wonderful experiences because I was, helping him write legislation, and I was picking up his laundry. I was talking to people who needed to get a urinal replaced in the Brighton Beach baths, and then trying to get stop signs moved and mailboxes moved and writing campaign literature. And I was on the floor of the assembly when they passed the abortion bill. So I was doing really interesting
And you
stuff.
were also making extra money by working the Catskills?
I was making a lot of money, but I was also enjoying the politics. I was very good at helping people. I think it helped me prepare, and ironically, for being a criminal defense lawyer, because while I wasn't dealing with, people in desperate straits, I had to navigate the bureaucracy of city agencies. You try getting a stop sign moved, and I bet you it could take you the rest of your natural life if you don't know how to do it. And I figured it out, and I was good at this stuff. Some of it was ridiculous, and some of it was very, very important. But I helped thousands of people, and Solars became a very, very popular assemblyman because we really helped a lot of people with serious issues also.
Now, during that time, you got married to your wife, who you met in the synagogue?
I met her.
When you were
I met her
14?
in the synagogue when she was 14. I was 18. She came for a weekend to visit her grandmother, who belonged to the same synagogue. I met her that night at a local party. We dated off and on, and we didn't get married until after college, until I finished college.
Right, so you finished college, and here's the kid who spent his time Bell Harbor, Long Beach, New York City, and the Catskills. Ohio? How'd that happen?
When I decided to go to law school, it was very late in the year. I didn't have incredible grades because I went to college at night and I worked all day long. And a lot of the law schools were not offering any scholastic help, any scholarship help. And I found this place in Ohio, and they offered me a scholarship. And we went out there, and I saw the place. And with the help of, my in-laws and parents, it was very cheap to live there. And my wife and I decided to try it because for the first time in my life, I would be a full-time student. And it was a miracle. I mean,
And you were also you were a minority over there. You were one of the few
It was
Jewish
a Methodist.
families.
It was a Methodist school, and my wife and I maintained a pretty good life. We celebrated our holidays, sometimes alone, and we didn't have a synagogue, but, we set up our prayers in the house. And but the school was very good, and it was a Methodist school, and it was nicer to me than some of the Jewish schools were in terms of switching classes when they came out on Rosh Hashanah.
And what's really
Yom
nice,
Kippur.
you got your degree, your law degree, and a couple of years ago you got an honorary doctorate.
I'm a pretty prominent alumni of that school. It's a small law school. I did great. The first time in my life I could be a full-time student. I was an editor of Law Review. I was editor of the school newspaper. I was on the mock moot court team. I graduated in the top with distinction in the top 10% of my class. And then schools that didn't want me at all initially started to solicit me to come join the LLM program.
So, but your first year between law school, how do you decide that you wanted to become a criminal defense? You went to work for the DA Gold.
In law school, the criminal law professor that I had, who's no longer alive, George Thompson, was a very dynamic, interesting person. And what I found in law school is that the only subject that really interested me, I did well throughout my school, but the only subject that remotely interested me was criminal law because it was real-life drama, and I liked it. And he was a terrific teacher, and he encouraged me. So the first year, I got an internship on the recommendation of a family friend, and I went to work in the Brooklyn DA's office as a summer intern. I think I got $60 for the whole summer, which essentially paid for your car fare. But I was in the pits every day. I was in the criminal courthouse in Brooklyn every day for 10, 12, 14 hours, and I loved it. I mean, I loved the action.
The second year was an interesting thing. How did that happen?
I read about a very prominent law firm in Manhattan that was at the time probably the best, in my opinion, best white-collar criminal defense lawyers in New York, Bob McGuire and Andy Lawler. This was before Bob McGuire became police commissioner. But they had a very interesting case, and I called McGuire from Ohio, and he was gracious enough to take my call. I told him I thought this was an interesting case. I had some great ideas. I'd love to talk to him about it. He said, okay, when, if you're ever in New York, call me and, maybe we can have lunch. And it was a nice way of essentially, getting out of the conversation. Well, I hung up the phone, got my only suit, drove to Dayton, got on a plane, went to New York, and the next morning I called McGuire, and I said, he picked up the phone again, much to my delight, and I said, can we have lunch? He said, I thought you called me from Ohio. I said, I did, but I came to New York so I could have lunch with you, and I charged the trip on my credit card that had a $500 max, and I couldn't do it again. So I think he felt bad and intrigued, and I think he was too nice a man to say no.
So he hired you for the second...
We had lunch for 2 hours, and I talked him into giving me a summer job. I did great work for him that summer, even if I do say so myself. The personalities were right. I liked him. I liked Andy Lawler. We got along very well. And then I worked for them my last year in law school, long distance. They would give me assignments. I would do the memos and mail them back. They sent me checks, which to me was like, I thought I was becoming a millionaire if they sent me $400 for a month's work. And then they offered me a job to come work for them full-time after law school. And I took the bar, passed, and I worked for them for 2 years. And it was, I think, the hottest job in New York at the time, and I was their only associate.
So you join them, you spend 2 years, and then you say, I really want to get into the DA's office, right?
And I wanted to be a trial lawyer. And one day I said to McGuire, people are coming here for you. They're not coming here for me. I think I can do this. I think I could do it well. How do I become you? And he said, you're never going to become a trial lawyer unless you try cases. And I can't give you cases to try. But if you went to a DA or a U.S. Attorney's office, you'd get a lot of experience in a short period of time. And at the time, there was a long waiting list to get into the U.S. Attorney's office. And Robert Morgenthau had just taken over the Manhattan District Attorney's office, and he was very close to McGuire. And McGuire called him and said, I have a great young associate named Ben Brafman, who I think would do great in your office. And Morgenthau met me the next day, and I think a week later, I was in the Rackets Bureau of the Manhattan District Attorney's office, and I tried more cases in 4 years as an assistant district attorney, back to back to back, than I think most lawyers try in a lifetime.
And simultaneously, you went for your LOM in criminal?
I was going to NYU Law School at night. I got an LLM in criminal justice. And, to be honest with you, it was, again, 6 o'clock in the morning, getting up and walking into the apartment in Queens at midnight, and spending an entire day in a courtroom. And it was a real grind. But it was
So now
good.
what happens? So now you have your LLM, you have the DA, and what happens to Ben Brafman?
A lot of people began to notice me. I was trying some fairly high-profile cases. There was some press coverage of significant cases I was fortunate enough to try successfully. A couple of major law firms who were involved representing companies that had been extorted, and I was, prosecuting the people who did the extortion. A number of the partners in those firms who I dealt with, I think they liked my work and my work ethic because they saw how hard I worked. And they started talking to me and said, when you leave the DA's office, you could come work here, and if you wanted to. And I was saying to myself, wow. And they were saying, someone out of your class, 4 years out, with your trial experience, we would give you $125,000 a year if you would start. Now, at the time, I was making $15,000 a year. I didn't know anybody who made $100,000 a year or north of 100. I thought, that was like Bill Gates money today to me in my mindset then. And I thought about it, and it was very hard to turn down. But I wanted to try opening my own practice, so I did. I borrowed $15,000 from my wife's grandfather, and I...
A townhouse, right?
What?
You found an office in a townhouse.
It was great. I was offered an office on the ground floor of a townhouse on East 74th Street, right off of Madison Avenue, and it was magnificent. And when you walked in, you didn't know whether I owned the townhouse or whether I was a tenant because I was on the ground floor, marble staircase. It used to be an embassy. My office had a fireplace. I had $15,000, cost me like $2,000 to furnish the place. Got a Selectric typewriter and opened the law firm, and then started running around telling everybody I was in private practice, hoping they would send me business. And I marketed myself. I was always good at marketing myself. And people who had cases with me when I was in the DA's office, who respected me, started to send me work. McGuire and Lawler, who started to recommend people to me. And I told my wife, I'll do this for 6 months. We can pay the bills for 6 months on the $15,000. If it doesn't work, I'll get a job and I'll work for a firm the rest of my life. And in a couple of months, I paid my grandfather back the $15,000, and it's all been good. I've been very lucky.
I think in New York they consider you the leading criminal attorney. Besides marketing, how do people know and find out about Ben Brafman?
It doesn't happen quickly. And someone asked me that in another interview, and I said, I know a lot of people who are much smarter than I am. I know a lot of people who have better academic and professional credentials, but I don't know anybody who has worked harder at his craft than I have. Maybe as hard, but I don't know anybody who's worked harder than I have. So you try a lot of cases. People begin to notice quality work. A trial is a public spectacle in many ways. You're in the well of a courtroom, and if it's an interesting case, people watch. Some of these cases are covered by the media, and I was very lucky. I started to win a lot of cases, and as a criminal defense lawyer, I know very good criminal defense lawyers who haven't had an acquittal in 20 years, and I started to work with some very good lawyers. I started to get some very, very good results.
How do you build up a large clientele in the entertainment business, would you say?
That happened over years by accident almost. I mean, Johnny Cochran, who turned out to be a very, very good friend and a really kind, decent man who's, I think, a terrific lawyer. He met me and interviewed me on a show one day and really liked me and started talking about my work and intrigued. And then Puff Daddy got arrested in an incident involving Jennifer Lopez in the club. And that at the time was the trial of the decade. He was the hottest rap singer in the world. She was the hottest Latino pop culture person in the world. They had the #1 video, #1 record, #1 fashion lines that were opening. And when he got in trouble in New York, Cochran, who had just finished the O.J. Simpson trial and was, considered one of the best lawyers, or certainly the best known lawyer in America, called me and said, "This is New York. This is not L.A. I want you with me. I want this to be, your trial, and you'll do 90%. I can't abandon him because he's close to me and I love him and I'm going to help him. But this is your turf, and would you like to work the case with me?" And I was like, "Sure."
What about Dominic Strauss-Kahn, which was a very high-profile, international high-profile?
Dominic Strauss-Kahn was probably the highest-profile case I have had and maybe will ever have, because he was, going to be president of France if not for the incident in the hotel. That case came to me through Bill Taylor, who's a prominent lawyer in Washington. We had worked as co-counsel in a major case where he represented a law firm, I represented a senior partner. And when this happened, he knew Strauss-Kahn. Strauss-Kahn called him because he had done some work for the IMF with Strauss-Kahn. And Taylor, who knew I was based in New York, knew it was a New York case. It was being prosecuted by the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. I don't think there's anybody around, quite frankly, who has had as much experience in that building, in that office. And Taylor brought me in. And, it was a stunning success that I think we both deserve credit for. But I've been in high-profile cases before. I never saw anything like that.
You'd mentioned the cameras were always around.
We had
Even you were in Israel.
We had camera crews from France parked on the corner of my office building at 48th and 3rd for the entire summer of 2011. When I went to visit my son in Israel, camera crews followed me from the airport, to his home in Jerusalem. It was crazy. When the case was dismissed, I was told by our media person that we were on the front page of every newspaper in the world.
On these high-profile cases, you retain the Sabbath over the time.
My family has always been observant of the Sabbath. I observe the Sabbath. I take great pride in it. When I was a kid growing up, I didn't like it because I couldn't play ball, I couldn't ride my bike, and I was restricted. Today, I look forward to it beginning Monday because it's 24 hours of peace. Things actually stop. So I've had some issues early on with judges who were reluctant to adjourn early on a Friday in the winter, and I've had to, stand my ground. Sometimes I've stayed in hotels near the courthouse and actually walked home or walked to a place where I didn't have to ride. But, in recent years, certainly in the last 15, 20 years, I think I've been consistent. I'm principled, and I think on balance people respect me. And ironically, Jews and non-Jews, but sometimes non-Jews respect it more because they are sort of awed by the fact that you can do what you do and yet this stuff's important to you.
Let's talk about family. You've been married for how many years?
42 years.
42 years. Your wife is a librarian.
Retired librarian, children's librarian.
And talk to me about your children and grandchildren.
I have 2 children. I have a daughter, Jenny, who's married to a wonderful young man, Morty. I have a son, David, who is married to a wonderful young woman named Jasmine. My son lives in Jerusalem, Israel. My daughter, Jenny, and her family live near me. And my daughter has 6 children, 5 boys and a girl. And my son in Israel has 8 children, 6 boys and two girls.
So, for the kid who didn't know what he was going to be, from a variety of things, you have really become a very prominent member of the community, helping all sides. And I'm very happy you were here today. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much.